to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic will be an exchange advantage. Does it win? Well, we'll know a bit more about it after this lesson. The first example I chose is a famous game between Mises and the legendary Cuban world champion Capablanca. Let's get started with the position that was reached after just 19 moves into the game. What do we see? Looks like a very normal position where white has an extra rook versus black's bishop and one extra pawn. In other words, white is 1 point up. Well, neither side has a very obvious weakness, and it's normally pretty clear that white should be better because of their material advantage. Yet it will be quite interesting to see that without white making any particularly bad move or blunder, things will turn around in just 10 short pair of moves. Well, let's see how Capablanca made his magic work. The first challenge that white has is how to bring his rook from the corner from h1 to the open e file. As we can see at the moment, black's bishop on b4 is controlling the e1 square, so therefore white played a logical move by playing c3, chasing the black bishop away so the rook can get to e1 next. Of course, you may say, but this weakens the position in front of the white king. That is true, but given the fact that so many of the pieces are already traded off the board and we have very limited material left, it actually is an okay move. Black retreated with the bishop, didn't have much of a choice, and now finally white was ready to bring his own rook to e1, very important, because now white has full control of the e-file and therefore black is unable to come with his rook to e8. So white has so far consolidated his advantage and it should be a winning position. We can also see that white will look for an entry point to attack the black pawns, and normally that would be on e7. So that looks like a pretty scary thought from black's perspective once the white pieces start entering the 7th rank. Black here responded with queen c6, offering the exchange of queens. Well, what would you do? Give yourself a minute or two and try to make a strategic decision what's better for you, to trade or not to trade. And then come back, listen, what's the correct decision. I hope you thought that you should trade the queens. Indeed, that is the correct choice. Why? Simply by following the rule of thumb that when you're ahead material, you do want to trade pieces, especially queens. Why? To avoid the opponent's counterplay. In this particular case, it would also mean that black would need to double up his pawns on the c file after the exchange on c6, and on top of it, the white rook could enter to the 7th rank right after that. So it's very clear that that's what white should have done. However, I know so many people who simply like to attack, like to have queen on the board pretty much at all cost. Well, for those of you who think like that you like your queens and you want to keep it so you can checkmate your opponent, learn from the example of Mises, which led to tragedy for white in this game. Instead of playing simple, technical chess, simply transform the material advantage to a full point, white went on and tried to attack. Big mistake. So this was the first mistake that white made by avoiding the exchange of queens and playing rook to d5. Now black continued with queen to d7. And now came the next mistake when white played f5. I have to say at first it is a good looking move, with the idea to then push the pawn to f6, and if indeed white would get to do that, that looks rather attractive, because if black would take that pawn, then of course the king would be under fire of the white major pieces, or if the pawn pushes through to g6, the g7 square would be very, very weak, with possibly the white queen going to f4 and h6 and creating an attack. So it looks like a very serious threat. However, at this point, all of a sudden, Capablanca took over the initiative, gaining the momentum. So this is a very important moment in the game. All of a sudden, black decided to reactivate his bishop and bring it to e7 first, of course, and then to f6. What white should have done instead of f5, simply try to push the g-pawn first. So even if that black bishop ends up on f6, the bishop will be chased away real quick with g5. So let's go back, and white, as we said, played f5 with the idea to push f6 next, which white never got to do. Came c6, chasing the rook back, followed by d5. So now the idea is for black to try to regroup the bishop. Of course, at this very moment, the white queen is not under a real attack, as the pawn is in a pin, and if pawn would capture queen, rook would capture queen, and that wouldn't lead anywhere. So in fact, in this position still, white is not doing too bad, but white continued to play carelessly, thinking that anything and everything wins. In fact, in this position, white still could have played f6, which was a better choice than what white did, playing queen f3. Now all of a sudden things are turning around. Came bishop e7. Of course, if f6, the bishop would just take, and the black bishop will find itself in a beautiful ideal position on f6, on one hand holding off white's pawn march with g4, g5. In fact, at this position, black is threatening with a pinning move, bishop to g5. And on the other hand, once the black bishop gets to f6, it will beautifully paste towards white's king on the queen side. Right now the game continued with the two white rooks doubling up on the e-file, attacking the bishop, but of course the bishop is aiming to go to f6 anyway. And here white should have understood that things are not going their way, and should have been more cautious about black's counterplay. The best choice white had here in this position was to immediately play g4. But white instead decided to bring the queen to h5 first, perhaps in hopes that then white will play g4 and g5 and just still trying to crush black. But reality is that now that black has significantly improved the position of their bishop, things have changed. White is not better actually. Now there is an unbalanced position where obviously white still has the material advantage, but strategically the black pieces are better located, and in fact the black king is in a safer position. So therefore white shouldn't have been going all out and just think of attack, should have been started to think also about defense. Black continued with h6, a smart move which takes under control the g5 square, and white continued on the wrong path by playing g4, and now came probably the surprise, the plan or the move that white overlooked in the game. In fact, I suggest you try to find it yourself. How should black defend in this position? Against white's attacking plan, the attacking plan is to play h2 to h4 and then g5, seemingly with a crushing attack. And amazingly, black has a very smart defense against it, namely by playing king h7. Looks like a harmless move, in fact moves right into the same file where white queens is. Now the problem is that if white indeed continues with h4, all of a sudden the white queen is trapped. How unpleasant. So finally white understood that they cannot follow up with the original plan, and white played king to b1 right now, getting out of potential checks of the bishop, and black brought the rook into the game, getting ready to push the d pawn soon. Came rook d1, preparing for that. By the way, here it was time to try to get the queen back to where action is with queen h3. As we saw, tactically it simply didn't work out for white to proceed with the attack on the king's side. So the queen should have retreated to h3. And black continued with c5. And white's problem here really is that the queen wasted so much time in getting to h5 and starting the attack on the king's side, and now they would actually need to waste another couple moves to get back and recognize that the attack didn't work out. But white recognized that too late and came back with the queen just now, and came queen a4. Rook d2, check. Now if the king goes to c1, the black bishop would pin with bishop g5. King went to the corner. Now we can see already how the black bishop is aiming right at white's king. Obviously, what black needs to do under such circumstances is trying to open up the diagonal, get rid of the c3 pawn, and then attack the b2 pawn. So therefore, black's next move is very natural and logical, b5. White now finally recognizes it's time to trade queens, but now it is black who says no. Queen a4, a cute little trick. If rook takes d5, black checkmates in just two moves with an elegant queen sacrifice. Therefore, white played king b1, because now white renewed the threat to d5, as the same combination would no longer work, as white no longer would have the back rank weakness. After king b1, black continued the plan to open the diagonal further so the bishop on f6 can become more powerful. Pawn takes, queen takes, and now yet another tactical trick. If rook takes, then black trades rook. Now of course the queen is busy guarding the key b2 square, so only the rook can capture back, and black can make another nice little combination, as after queen b2 the white rook would be lost and black would come out with an extra pawn in a queen endgame. Therefore, after queen b4, white couldn't take again, played a3 and queen a4. Finally, it seems that white is ready to take. The problem is that the black pieces are coordinated so well in the attack against white's king that black's attack prevails. Rook b8, rook d2, and c4. That's the key. In addition to the queen, rook, and bishop, that c-pawn is a very important participant in the attack. The pawn is about to get to c3, and then white faces a lot of trouble. King, queen g3, rook b3, queen d6, and c3. Even stronger was to play bishop b2 first, rook b2, and c3 now. And for example, take, king c1, check, king d1, check, and then pawn promotes. Obviously, black is winning easily. The game continued with c3, which of course is still good enough to win. Rook c2 takes, rook d3, and now a cute move, queen e4, sacrificing. If rook takes rook, then just queen e1, followed by checkmate within a few moves. Or after rook d1, which aims to guard the back rank where the king is hiding out, rook c3 using the pin, where white resigned, because for example, after queen d2, which protects the rook, rook a3, and white is helpless against the checkmate in the corner. A beautifully played middle game by Capablanca. It's amazing how he turned it around from a seemingly hopeless position. What's the moral of the story? Generally, when you're ahead material, it's wise to avoid the opponent's attack or counterplay and trade queens, simplify. Generally, such endgames are winning. And now let's move on to our next example that was played between Kramer and Thomas. Well, what do we see? We see a similar situation as in the previous example. White is again up an exchange for a pawn. However, there is a major difference in the situation in that there isn't a single open file. Therefore, unless white succeeds to open files eventually for their rooks, it's not really visible the advantage of the rook over the bishop. Naturally, long term, if white succeeds to open a file, the advantage will be clear. So therefore, white has a clear game plan, and that is trying to open a file. Now in this particular case, white has to be careful also, because black has a beautiful chain of pawns right here, b7 through e4. And remember, if white is not active enough and proactive opening files and so on, what black will do is black will play b6, c5, d4 and create pass pawns of his own. So therefore, here to play queen c5 with the idea that we discussed in the previous example to trade queens would be not good for a particular concrete reason, namely that black would gain the momentum to advance his pawns to accomplish the plan to then advance the pawn to d4. So therefore, white did better. White went right away to try to accomplish the plan of playing b4, b5 and open a file so the white rook can get around and attack the black army. That's why white played queen c3, a simple looking move, simply putting the queen in an ideal position, getting control of the d4 square and, most importantly, preparing b4. Now, another big difference in this position compared to the previous one, that the black bishop, due to the fact that all this pawn chain is on the same color squares, the black bishop is kind of stuck a little bit behind his own pawns and does not have a clear target in white's position. Black continued with bishop d7 and white played b4 with the idea to play b5 next. Now if black would play b6, white will get the opportunity to play f5, as if bishop would take pawn, then queen c6, and white would certainly accomplish its goal in opening a file. It would be certainly a good trade for white. So after b4, black played a6, trying to prevent the b5 idea, and now white simply started further improving his position. Queen d4, h6, as we can see, black doesn't have any active plan. Rook f to d1 with a simple threat of capturing the pawn. Therefore the queen had to move out of the pin, and now white just continues with a4. There's not much black can do at this point to stop b5. Black played king h7 and b5 arrived. Takes, takes. If pawn takes, the d5 pawn falls. Black played rook a8, trying to get control of the only open file. Pawn takes, and then the next move will be rook a1. Black took with the bishop and rook a1. Rook a3, trade, trade, and a second rook comes. So what black has been trying to do is to put the bishop on c6, that will be protected by the b7 pawn, and then the bishop will be holding the d5 pawn. So therefore white needs to start looking for additional targets, and I think that will be in the g7 pawn, and possibly in some cases even by advancing the f pawn to weaken the position around black's king. King queen b3, h3, a smart move, making sure white's king will have a escape window on h2. Queen d3, and here white already could have traded queens and won in a technical way, but chose to go after black's king, queen c5. And here the game plan would be for white to get the rook to a8 and perhaps just get around to c8 and c7, or after rook a8 and maybe play king h2 at some time, get the queen to f8 and basically target g7. Here black did kind of something surprising, which perhaps speed up the end, but the game was lost in any case. Rook a8, king h5, that's really weird, king h2, queen e2, rook g8, king g6, and queen d4. Well, the moral of the story here was that, as so often in positions where you have rooks, and especially in this case, an exchange advantage, and your rooks have no open files, unless you're able to open a file, it will be insignificant, your material advantage. Rooks really shine when they are on open files. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we are. In this position, it is white's turn, and the question is, how can white win? The challenge is that right now, the white bishop and pawn on c5 are both hanging. Well, I suggest you take some time. I would give you 15 minutes or so, trying to figure out not only how you would continue here with white, but half of the solution is actually trying to find all the pitfalls and the correct counterplay for black. Have fun and good luck solving it. And now, here is the solution. The only correct first move is bishop to f7. You'll see in a minute why. Black took the pawn, and white plays h7. Obviously, everything is around this h pawn. If it got promoted, normally white would be winning. Rook c8, and now you see why f7 was the only good square, because the bishop needs to go to g8. But it's not over. Try to find what black can do now. Black has a tricky defense, rook c5. But what's tricky about that? Pawn promotes, right? Not quite. Black would now save the game with rook h5 check, queen takes, and stalemate. Well, okay, but how about king h4 simply? Still not over. Rook c1. With the idea to then check with rook h1. Bishop e6, check, and over, right? Still not over. It's very important to always look for the resources that your opponent has, not just your own. Rook g1, and again it would be a blunder to promote the pawn to a queen. Why? Because black now would play rook g4. If bishop takes, again stalemate. Or after king h5, rook h4, and unless white wants to lose and move the king out, giving up the queen, white has to take, and again stalemate. Pretty amazing. And yet white can win by under-promoting his pawn to a rook. And now white's material advantage will prevail. White is winning. A beautiful endgame. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And of course, I hope you have better ideas about the imbalanced positions when you have a rook versus bishop and pawn, or the other way around. Thanks for listening. So long, until next time.